Whenever you look at the mechanics of how history is actually recorded in real time, you usually find these massive institutions, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You find the United Nations or these sprawling international media conglomerates.
Or state-funded intelligence agencies.
Yeah, exactly. But today, we're looking at something entirely different. We are opening up a highly concentrated source text, a Wikipedia article, and its associated references.
Right.
And it outlines the architecture of this incredibly specialized, localized information network called the Iran Press Watch.
It's a fascinating structure to look at.
It really is. So the mission for our time with you today is to analyze the operations and, well, the ultimate global impact of this specific research entity, one that is dedicated to documenting the persecution of Baha'is in Iran.
Right, because the mechanics here are what's so striking.
Exactly. We're going to examine how a localized reporting apparatus built by a historian and a businessman, right, and run by a mere 14 volunteers, how it manages to funnel critical data directly into the hands of global human rights commissions, academic journals, and even sovereign governments.
Which is no small feat.
Not at all. And for those of you engaging with this deep dive visually, you'll probably notice the backdrop here has shifted.
Yeah, we have this dense, almost labyrinthine collection of historical bookshelves.
Right, and they seamlessly bleed right into the modern, sprawling architecture of global cityscapes.
It's a great visual anchor.
Yeah, it anchors the journey we're taking today with you, tracing the path of localized, meticulously archived information as it travels, out of a specific region and into the sprawling corridors of international power.
The visual of the bookshelves merging into the cityscape is, well, it's a vital framework for you to hold on to as we dissect this text, because we are not just looking at a static website here.
No, we're really not.
We are tracking a pipeline. We are tracing the immense friction involved in moving raw, often highly contested data out of a closed environment.
Processing it through an editorial bottleneck.
Exactly, and projecting it onto the international stage where it eventually hardens into foreign policy or academic precedent.
Hardening into policy, yeah. And as we prepare to track that pipeline, it is necessary to establish the analytical lens we're using today.
Always important with this kind of material.
Right, because the source text we are analyzing operates in a space of severe geopolitical and human rights conflict. The Wikipedia article and its citations use highly charged, very specific terminology.
Words like persecution.
Yes, persecution and gross injustice, directed specifically at the actions of the Iranian government.
Right.
So we're stepping into this text today to act strictly as analytical observers, not geopolitical judges.
We are impartially reporting the claims.
Exactly. The claims, the organizational structure, the informational pathways, exactly as they are presented in the source material. We are not taking a political side.
Nor are we endorsing specific geopolitical stances.
Right. Our singular focus is on the mechanics. How does an organization structured around these specific claims gather its data, and where does that data ultimately go?
Framing this as an exploration of mechanics allows us to really appreciate the profound logistical challenges inherent in human rights documentation.
It really does.
When we look at the text neutrally, as a blueprint of an organization, we can dismantle how a transnational network actually functions under pressure.
Okay, let's unpack this. The document gives us a very clinical, direct definition right out of the gate. It states that the Iran Press Watch is a research entity that documents the persecution of Baha'is in Iran.
Research entity.
Right. The choice of the phrase research entity stands out immediately. It doesn't label itself an activist group.
Or a rebel network.
Or even a news agency. It actively claims the mantle of research.
What's fascinating here is the strategic deployment of that specific terminology. When a group defines itself as a research entity, it is making a structural promise to its audience.
And to the international authorities it hopes to influence, right?
Exactly. Because activism is often perceived as inherently subjective.
Driven by emotion.
Driven by emotion, aimed at immediate disruption. But research, conversely, implies methodology.
A system.
Right. It implies the systematic gathering, verification, and archiving of data. By adopting the posture of a research entity, the Iran Press Watch is signaling that its primary function is the creation of an objective, enduring ledger of facts.
Which you need. You cannot address a human rights issue at the United Nations or within a foreign government's policy framework if the foundational data is viewed as purely activist rhetoric.
It just won't hold up. It must be processed, documented, and presented with real academic or investigative rigor.
And that structural promise becomes even more complex when you look at the immediate citation for that definition.
The Egyptian website.
Yes. The text says, according to the website of the Egyptian Baha'is, Iran Press Watch provides the latest news regarding the Baha'is of Iran and their persecution by their own government.
It's a striking detail.
We have an organization dedicated entirely to monitoring events within the borders of Iran. But the definitional source provided is a website based in Egypt.
Which implies a massive logistical hurdle.
Right. It suggests that the internal reporting infrastructure within Iran for this specific community is severely compromised.
Yeah, entirely non-existent.
Exactly, forcing a transnational relay of information.
And that geographic disconnect between the subject of the news and the host of the news, that is a defining characteristic of diaspora and transnational human rights networks.
That has to be.
If a community is experiencing state-level pressure, which the text characterizes as persecution by their own government, the localized digital and physical infrastructure required to broadcast that reality is usually the first thing to be restricted.
You can't just set up a local server.
No, the information cannot simply be published locally. It must be smuggled across digital borders.
That's a great way to put it, smuggled across digital borders.
The Egyptian Baha'i website, functioning as a validating platform, demonstrates a necessary international solidarity. The raw data might originate in Iran, but the servers, the web hosting, the initial broadcast architecture, they have to reside in entirely different sovereign nations just to survive.
So the information literally has to leap borders just to exist in the public domain.
Just to exist.
And once it leaps those borders, the stated mission of the Iran Press Watch actually expands significantly. If you look at the second half of that statement from the Egyptian website.
About the world's reaction.
Yes. The source text notes that Iran Press Watch not only provides the latest news, but it also, quote, updates its readers with the world's reaction to the gross injustice experienced by the Baha'is of Iran.
Which is a crucial pivot.
It is, because documenting an event is a straightforward archival task, but documenting the world's reaction to that event introduces an entirely different psychological and strategic objective.
It creates a deliberate feedback loop. Think about the sheer vulnerability of living in an environment where your daily reality is not reflected in your local media.
Or worse, where your local media actively contradicts your experience.
Right. Isolation is one of the most effective tools of systemic pressure. If a community feels that their trials are invisible, the psychological toll is devastating.
So by structurally mandating the documentation of the world's reaction, the Iran Press Watch is actively combating that isolation.
Yes. They are not just creating a ledger for historians. They are creating a mirror for the community itself.
It validates the reality of the people experiencing the events.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for the reader? Imagine if you are part of that community and you read an update showing that a human rights commission in Europe or a government in Australia just issued a statement about your specific situation.
That update isn't just news.
No, it is verifiable proof that the localized suffering has registered on the global conscience. The framing of the world's reaction transforms isolated local incidents into an ongoing global dialogue.
It proves that the information vacuum has been breached.
Yes, breached. But strategically, cataloging that reaction builds something else too.
A portfolio of international precedent.
Right.
If a research entity meticulously records every time a global body reacts negatively to a specific policy in Iran, they're building a database of international consensus.
And that database can then be utilized by other NGOs, diplomats, legal scholars to leverage further support.
It turns a localized issue into a sustained international diplomatic concern.
But to build that kind of sophisticated dual-purpose architecture to manage the local news and the global reaction, that requires a very specific type of leadership.
It certainly does.
When you look at the architects of this system, it is not a team of UN diplomats or massive NGO directors. The text introduces us to two founders with a very specific, almost bizarre collision of skill sets.
Bizarre, but highly effective.
Very effective.
Yeah.
The text states that Iran Press Watch was founded by Ahang Rabbani, a Baha'i historian, translator, and author who acted as editor-in-chief, and Phillip Tussing, president of the trading firm Facilitation International, a Baha'i educator with the online Baha'i Learning Center, the Wilmette Institute, who oversaw editing work.
Let's look at the first half of that partnership.
Ahang Rabbani.
Yes. He is listed as the editor-in-chief, but his qualifying titles are historian, translator, and author.
Which is an interesting choice for a Newswatch site.
Placing a historian in the role of editor-in-chief for a daily newswatch organization is a profound choice. A traditional journalist looks for the immediate hook, the breaking event of the day.
What happened an hour ago?
Exactly. But a historian looks for the continuum. When a localized event occurs, say an arrest or a property seizure, a historian does not treat it as an isolated data point.
They contextualize it.
They contextualize it within a decades-long or even centuries-long pattern of behavior. They understand how today's civil action connects to historical precedents.
And that ensures that the data being published by the Iran Press Watch has the academic weight necessary to be taken seriously by international bodies.
Precisely. And the title of translator is equally critical, perhaps even more so when we consider the transnational friction we discussed earlier.
Right, because the raw data emerging from Iran is presumably in Persian or Farsi.
And it is steeped in a very specific cultural, theological, and legal context.
So Rabbani's job wasn't just converting words from one language to another.
No, it was much deeper than that. He had to translate the deeply nuanced reality of an Iranian legal or social event into the bureaucratic, secular vocabulary understood by an English-speaking international audience.
Or a Western Human Rights Commission.
Right. He served as the cultural and linguistic bridge. Translation is always an act of interpretation.
Especially with state-level documentation.
When dealing with state-level documentation, a mistranslated legal term or a misunderstood theological decree can completely alter the international community's understanding of an event.
So the intellectual rigor required to maintain accuracy while navigating those two different worlds is immense. Rabbani provided the narrative and historical engine.
But intellectual rigor alone cannot keep a website running.
No, it can't.
It can't manage secure communications or organize a decentralized team. That requires an entirely different operational discipline.
Which brings us to Phillip Tussing.
Yes.
He is described as the president of a trading firm, Facilitation International.
Which is such a fascinating pivot.
Applying the operational logistics of an international trade executive to a grassroots human rights monitoring network. An international trading firm relies on supply chain management, secure communication networks, resource allocation.
Maintaining operational efficiency across borders.
Exactly. Tussing was essentially applying corporate supply chain logistics to the flow of human rights data.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a human rights organization, no matter how noble its mission, will collapse without a functional chassis.
Right. The data is the product.
And it must move securely and efficiently from the source to the consumer. A trading firm president understands how to build the digital infrastructure necessary to support that movement.
And the text also notes Tussing's role as an educator with an online learning center, the Wilmette Institute,
which introduces a pedagogical framework to his management style. He understands how to organize information digitally,
how to manage decentralized networks of people over the internet,
and how to structure complex data so that it can be easily digested and learned by a remote audience.
The synergy is incredibly potent. You have the historian ensuring the data is unimpeachably accurate and deeply contextualized.
And you have the businessman ensuring the platform actually functions, remains secure, and effectively reaches its target demographic.
The text notes that Tussing oversaw editing work of the team, which means he was managing the human element of this pipeline.
And looking at the actual numbers provided in the text, that human element is startlingly small.
It really is. The article states that the team grew to 14 volunteer contributors and editors.
Grew to 14.
Yeah.
Which implies they operated with even fewer for a period of time.
Right. When we consider the sheer volume of data processing required, verifying clandestine sources, translating complex legal documents,
maintaining web infrastructure,
and constantly tracking the world's reaction, relying on a peak team of 14 volunteers represents an immense operational friction.
It's easy to assume this level of historical and operational synergy requires a massive corporate or institutional footprint.
Oh, absolutely. But a team of 14 people is smaller than the staff of most local neighborhood newspapers.
And these are volunteers.
They aren't protected by a massive corporate legal department. They don't have infinite server budgets.
The psychological and emotional weight placed on those 14 individuals is difficult to overstate.
They are acting as a decentralized intelligence agency, filtering through heavy, often traumatic news regarding their own community, day in and day out.
The risk of severe burnout in an environment like that is exceptionally high.
It has to be. Filtering through trial documents, reports of persecution, and accounts of systemic injustice regarding people you may know or a community you deeply identify with that requires a staggering level of intrinsic motivation.
These 14 volunteers were not simply clocking in for a shift. They were actively maintaining the only lifeline between a marginalized community and the global historical record.
They continued to process the data because they understood the terrifying alternative. If they stopped translating and archiving, the information would simply cease to exist on the international stage.
It would vanish.
And that drive to ensure the information exists permanently brings us to the actual artifacts of their labor. The Wikipedia article we are using as our source text doesn't just describe the Iran Press Watch in the abstract.
No, it provides a highly detailed bibliography.
Yes. In any analysis of a research entity, the footnotes and the references section are where the actual gravity of the work is revealed.
It shows us exactly what they were looking at and how they categorized it.
Right. The references listed at the bottom of this article are incredibly dense. We see citations titled The Baha'i Seven, another one titled Trial of the Iran, which the text helpfully translates as Friends in Iran.
And a very structural citation that simply reads, all documents tagged Iran.
Let's perform a deeper semantic analysis on that translation. Iran, meaning friends in Iran.
The juxtaposition of that specific term against the bureaucratic, severe language of the other citations reveals a profound narrative dissonance.
It really does. The word friends implies intimacy, community support, mutual care.
Perhaps a localized, informal network of leadership or guidance. It is a profoundly warm, humanizing term.
And it is immediately slammed up against the cold institution.
It strips away the abstract geopolitical language and reminds the reader that the entities being processed through these legal systems are neighbors, community members, humans.
The choice to maintain that terminology, to refer to them as the Iran while documenting their trials, is a specific editorial decision.
It insists on preserving the community's own identity within the historical record, rather than allowing them to be defined solely by the state's legal framework.
And furthermore, the citation for all documents tagged Iran at the Baha'i-library.com database indicates a highly sophisticated level of digital archiving.
Yes, the Iran Press Watch and its associated networks were not just writing summary blog posts.
They were actively tagging, categorizing, and building a searchable primary source database.
A tag is a mechanism of permanence.
Exactly. If a volunteer tags a translated court document, a personal letter, and a news report, all with the word Iran, they are constructing a digital string that ties years of disparate events together.
They are ensuring that a human rights lawyer or an academic researcher trying to understand the full narrative arc of the Friends in Iran doesn't have to hunt blindly.
The trail has been blazed for them.
But to truly grasp the complexity of what those 14 volunteers were tagging and translating, we have to look at the broader historical environment they were operating in.
Which is explicitly detailed in another citation.
Right. The bibliography anchors the localized events of the Iran into a much larger geopolitical current.
The third reference in the source text is an academic journal article. It is a piece authored by Ankita Sanyal in 2019, published in the Contemporary Review of the Middle East.
And the title of this piece is crucial: Baha'is in Post-Revolution Iran, Perspectives of the Ulema.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that single academic title unloads a massive amount of required context. When we see Perspectives of the Ulema in Sanyal's 2019 citation, we have to recognize the structural weight of that word.
For those unfamiliar with the specific mechanics of Middle Eastern statecraft, the ulema refers to the body of religious and legal scholars who hold recognized authority in Islamic theology and jurisprudence.
We aren't just talking about local politicians passing municipal ordinances here.
No, we are talking about a body of scholars whose theological interpretations heavily influence or directly dictate state law.
Which means the persecution being documented by the Iran Press Watch cannot be understood purely through the lens of secular civil rights violations.
It is inextricably rooted in state-sanctioned religious jurisprudence.
The 14 volunteer editors translating these documents have to navigate an immensely complex intersection of theology and state power.
They must understand how a specific theological perspective held by the ulema manifests as a tangible legal hurdle or a physical trial for the Iran.
And they have to do this within the specific historical epoch noted in the citation's title, Post-Revolution Iran.
That temporal marker is essential.
It tells the researcher that the legal and social structures being monitored are a direct result of the systemic upheaval and restructuring that followed the Iranian Revolution. The baseline for normal state operation shifted completely.
The volunteers are therefore operating at a staggering level of complexity.
They really are.
They must receive a localized report regarding the Friends in Iran, recognize how that event is a manifestation of the perspectives of the ulema, contextualize it within the ongoing reality of post-revolution Iran, translate all of that cultural and theological nuance into secular English.
And then tag it systematically for an archive.
It is an editorial process that demands the historical acumen of Ahang Rabbani and the logistical precision of Phillip Tussing simply to function.
The natural question that emerges for you, as a listener, from witnessing this immense localized effort is whether it actually breaches the international vacuum. Does this highly refined, tagged, and translated data ever leave those servers and actually impact the global stage?
And the SourceX answers that question unequivocally in its footnotes.
Yes, it does. We are going to trace the exact external authorities that are either citing this specific situation or operating in the exact same informational ecosystem based entirely on the Wikipedia text's references.
The transition from a 14-person grassroots effort to global institutional validation is laid bare in those citations.
We see references involving the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, which held a briefing or published material regarding the Baha'i 7 in 2015.
We see a citation from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, commonly known as ACLD, referencing a religion overview from April 2021.
We have a direct link to the Sovereign Government of Australia, specifically their Department of Home Affairs, via a Resource Guide 2020, Iran.
And we have the international NGO Human Rights Without Frontiers, which published a monthly news update in August 2022.
The disparity in scale between the origin of the data and the consumers of the data is massive. You have an official Human Rights Commission of the United States Congress. You have ACLE, which is a massive global data collection project that monitors political violence and instability worldwide.
You have the Department of Home Affairs for the entire nation of Australia.
And you have a European-based international NGO. We really need to unpack the mechanics of how a volunteer network integrates with a nation-state's policy apparatus.
This raises an important question regarding the modern flow of intelligence. Does a massive entity like the Australian government generate all of its own primary localized data, or does it rely on the grassroots infrastructure built by groups like the Iran Press Watch?
Right. In complex, closed geopolitical environments, sovereign governments and massive NGOs rarely have the on-the-ground agents or the granular community trust required to gather primary source documents regarding marginalized groups.
They operate at a macro level. They structurally rely on specialized research entities to do the micro-level gathering and translation.
It is essentially an outsourcing of the initial intelligence gathering. Think about it. The Australian Department of Home Affairs needs to compile a resource guide on Iran. They use these guides to inform their foreign policy, to guide diplomatic stances.
And crucially, to establish the factual baseline required to evaluate asylum claims.
Exactly. An immigration judge in Australia needs verifiable proof of systemic persecution to grant asylum. They cannot rely on anecdotes.
They need data that has been historically contextualized and accurately translated.
And that is exactly what the tagging system of the Iran archive provides. The Iran Press Watch has done the foundational labor.
They have organized the primary sources to the standard of evidence required by an international body.
So when the Tom Lantos Commission addresses the issue of the Baha'i 7, they are utilizing the vocabulary and the data points that were likely first translated and broadcast by these small, specialized networks.
The symbiosis is complete. The grassroots network provides the raw, verified intelligence, and the global institutions provide the massive platform and the policy impact.
And there's a fascinating nuance in the citation for Human Rights Without Frontiers. The 2022 reference is titled Iran, Monthly News About Baha'is and Christians in August.
Yes, the inclusion of Christians.
The explicit inclusion of Christians in that specific news update demonstrates that the informational ecosystem is not strictly siloed by religion.
When a research entity develops a methodology for monitoring human rights abuses within a specific state, when they learn how to navigate the post-revolution bureaucracy and interpret the decrees of the ulema, that methodology becomes highly valuable for monitoring other minority groups in the same region.
The architectural blueprint built to document the Baha'i experience scales to provide a clearer picture of the overall human rights climate for all marginalized groups in the area.
Organizations like ACLE depend on this overlapping data. When they compile a religion overview, they are aggregating thousands of these localized, highly specific data points to generate macro-level heat maps of global stability.
So the 14 volunteers at the Iran Press Watch are not just advocating for their own community. They are providing vital, verifiable pixels for a much larger global picture of human rights.
Without those specific pixels, the macro-level analysis utilized by the United Nations or the Australian government remains incomplete or deeply flawed.
But the preservation of those pixels, the long-term survival of that data, introduces the most terrifying reality of modern historical documentation.
Digital amnesia.
Yes. If we look at the metadata of the Wikipedia article itself, which is included in our course material and forms part of the architecture of this text, it contains a section of hidden categories.
And those categories include tags like all articles with dead external links and articles with dead external links from December 2025.
The text explicitly notes that the original website for Facilitation International is a dead link. A link to the Wilmette Institute's course list from 2008 to 2009 is a dead link.
The dead links reveal the profound fragility of digital history. We tend to view the internet as an eternal archive, but it is inherently transient.
Servers are shut down, domains expire, URLs are restructured.
And in the context of human rights networks operating under pressure, platforms are actively targeted or dismantled. The primary sources, the original Egyptian website cited in 2009, or the early digital reports generated by Tussing's infrastructure, are highly susceptible to digital amnesia.
It's the realization that the internet is written in sand. If the original link dies, the immediate, localized proof of the event vanishes with it. How does an organization dedicated to creating a permanent historical ledger survive the inevitable decay of its own digital infrastructure?
The history survives because the methodology designed by Rabbani and Tussing ensured that the transient digital news was rapidly absorbed into permanent institutional architectures before the original links died.
The Wikipedia page itself acts as a secondary, highly stable preservation layer.
And the citations in academic journals, like Ankita Sanyal's piece, and the inclusion of the data in official permanent government PDFs like the Australian Resource Guide, ensure that the core facts remain accessible even if the original grassroots URL vanishes.
The ultimate victory of the Iran Press Watch isn't just that they got the news out on a Tuesday in 2009. The victory is that they formalized the data so effectively that it became embedded in the bedrock of global academia and international law.
Even if every server they originally rented goes offline, the fact that their translations of the Yaran trials were cited by the Tom Lantos Commission means the data has achieved permanence.
The 14 volunteers were essentially fighting a two-front war. They were fighting the immediate geopolitical isolation of their community, and they were fighting the existential threat of digital amnesia.
It requires a relentless discipline to prioritize methodology over the immediate dopamine hit of a viral news cycle. Sensationalism might garner a quick spike in web traffic, but meticulous, dry, highly accurate tagging and translation is what gets an organization cited by the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project.
It is what ensures that a human rights lawyer, or a historian in the year 2050, seeking to understand the perspectives of the ulema regarding minority populations in post-revolution Iran, will find the primary source data categorized, translated, and permanently waiting for them.
Exactly.
Let's take a step back and look at the entirety of the informational pipeline we have mapped out for you today. We began with a highly charged environment, defined in our source text by terms like gross injustice and persecution directed at the Baha'i community.
We saw how the absolute necessity to document these events forced the creation of a transnational network, relying on external platforms like an Egyptian website just to establish a foundational voice.
We analyzed the brilliant, if unconventional synergy of the organization's architects. We saw how Ahang Rabbani utilized the long view of a historian and the cultural bridging of a translator to ensure the data was unimpeachable.
We examined how Phillip Tussing applied the rigorous logistics of an international trading firm and the pedagogical structure of an online educator to keep the information flowing.
And we acknowledge the immense operational and psychological friction endured by a remarkably small team that grew to just 14 volunteer editors.
We dug into the profound narrative dissonance of the bibliography, contrasting the intimate community reality of the friends in Iran against the cold, bureaucratic reality of a state trial.
We watched how the data, carefully tagged and translated, navigated the complex intersection of civil and religious law, dictated by the ulema in a post-revolution state.
And finally, we track that localized data as it breached the international vacuum, becoming the foundational intelligence utilized by the United States Congress, global data aggregators like ACLED, and the sovereign policy frameworks of the Australian government.
The methodology of the Iran Press Watch effectively outran the threat of digital amnesia, encoding transient news into the permanent historical record.
It is a stunning mechanical achievement for a grassroots organization.
And as we conclude our analysis of this pipeline, it is important to briefly reiterate our initial framework.
Yes, as a final reminder to you, the listener, our deep dive today necessitated the use of the explicit vocabulary found within our source text terms defining systemic pressure and governmental action.
We navigated this document strictly as an analytical exercise to understand the mechanics of how the Iran Press Watch organizes and disseminates its material. We impartially explored the structures and the informational pathways without taking a political stance or litigating the specific geopolitical claims presented in the text.
Our goal was to understand the how of human rights archiving.
And looking at the sheer volume of global impact generated by just 2 architects and 14 volunteers, it leaves a profound question lingering in the air. We've spent this time meticulously tracing how the Iran Press Watch managed to capture the world's reaction to the trials of the Friends in Iran, effectively forcing local events into the permanent global consciousness.
It demands reflection on our current reality.
It does. As you navigate an era defined by endless digital noise and overwhelming information overload, what other vital localized histories, what other quiet trials and hidden events are currently unfolding right now, simply waiting for a small, dedicated group of volunteers to build the infrastructure, start translating, and refuse to let the world look away?
It is a reminder that the historical record is not a passive phenomenon. It is actively constructed by those willing to do the meticulous work of documentation.
Exactly the kind of work we explored today. Thank you for bringing your curiosity to this deep dive. Exploring these complex architectures is only possible when you are willing to look past the surface. We will see you next time.